was awesome. All right, we got to keep things rolling here to keep on schedule. So coming up on deck next, we've got a Bristol Bay fisherman coming to us from Martinez, California. Let's welcome Harlan Bailey.
Hello, everybody. My name's Harlan Bailey, and I'm a cultural artifact. I've been working in the fishing industry in one capacity or another since I was 11 years old. That's a little over 60 years. I was born on 6th of July, the peak of the sockeye fishing period. I haven't been home on my birthday since 1968. I was asked to write a little poetry, so here it is. People say the legs go first, and it's true, but the mouth keeps going. The brain dies, and the mouth keeps going. Old white men, social commentary, political opinions, just like the hair and fingernails on a corpse. The mouth keeps going. This is my reading. It's a little story about the first time I fell in love. It's entitled Martha and Marilyn. Oh, by the way, I come from an Italian fishing community in California. It was basically a fishing village with Italian gill netters. And the gill netting there was closed in 1956. Joe DiMaggio was born in Martinez. Well, Joe DiMaggio's gone, and so is the gill netting. The great man was born in Little Italy, on the hillside above Granger's Wharf. He came into the world on the corner of Bunkers and Talbot Streets, blocked from the railroad tracks. His sister was injured there, gleaning coal that was dropped from passing trains. Had it not been for that eye injury, the family may never have moved to San Francisco. He might never have existed in our minds as the cultural icon he became. The old ethnic community of Martinez is mostly gone now. During Italian Festival Day, people make chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Other strangers drop dollar bills on their way to the Sunday market. There's a fisherman's memorial on the waterfront. The names on the monument, where are those names on the monument? The names on the monument speak of ethnicity and culture, of time and place. Aiello, Bruno, Costanza, DiMaggio, Lucido, Romeo. Almost all came from a group of coastal Sicilian fishing villages near Palermo. Trepani, San Vito, Isola Femina, Marettimo. They brought magic with them. When they came to this country, they knew how to fish. Fishing was their old country trade from ages past. Some of those old guys were on the fishing, here we go. Some of those old guys from Martinez were in San Francisco waiting to board the Star of Alaska for Bristol Bay fishing grounds when the 2006 earthquake occurred. The story told was that they departed for Alaska that very day. Not a man aboard the Star of Alaska had a cell phone. They didn't have CNN. And in fact, it was not possible to know anything that was out of earshot in those days. I asked people in town a few questions. I want to hear a few stories before the neural pathways fade away. Joe DiMaggio's family still lives in Martinez. I want to hear a story about the great athlete, words and images, soon to fade from memory. On the porch at Martinez Bait and Tackle, Dan Pellegrini is not talking. Joe DiMaggio's stories were, in the past, when Joe was alive, a type of currency for the Sicilian community. They kept his secrets. They didn't go downtown and tell outsiders when he was visiting. For individuals lucky enough to have had personal interactions. Their relationship with DiMaggio was a valuable social currency. I'm taking it with me to my grave. That's Dan Pellegrini's stock answer every time I ask him a question. Now, Dan's comfortably retired and half dead. He doesn't need the piddling 5 minutes of glory, which is the only exchange rate he will receive for talking to me. I, on the other hand, might find some use for these stories, thereby getting something for nothing. He's Sicilian. He has no problem keeping the secrets and confidences of somebody dead for 50 years. He's Sicilian. Hard bargaining for meager resources is epigenetic in him. Ron Newgard and I are the last Bristol Bay gillnet fishermen left alive in Martinez. We are Manky Italian. Ron and I are having our annual discussion concerning the sockeye fishing prospects for the coming Bristol Bay fishing season. He's sitting opposite me on the bait shop porch. He supplies live bay shrimp to the bait shop, which they sell for $22 a pound over the counter. His vessel is a 74-year-old, 36-foot wooden naval utility boat. Long ago, the deck and cabin were rebuilt to accommodate the live bait tank and beam trawl gear he uses to drag up the shrimp he sells. He builds his nets by hand, a three-dimensional exercise in nautical couture, a 42-foot-long funnel designed to keep its shape as it drags on the bottom. Every year in the boatyard, he rebuilds parts, pieces, and sections of his deteriorating boat. He keeps a bucket of laundry soap in the engine compartment where his engine is bleeding out. The Coast Guard is not his friend. Every second year, in serial fashion, gamecock sinks in its berth. He has it back on the fishing grounds within 2 weeks. The DiMaggios were always expert at keeping these broken old vessels afloat. When I watched him get off his boat, he was using a cane, limping up the dock towards me. He looked tired. He gets himself a cup of coffee, lights a cigarette. I can see a livid heart surgery scar and purple skin peeking out of the top of his shirt. Dude, he hails me. It's going to be a good year in the bay this year. Plenty of fish. He goes on in this fashion, always optimistic. I wasn't really listening. I was looking at him and thinking about the end of things. He tells me after a while this may be his last year in the bay. Maybe 44 years is enough. I'm feeling a little tired. Now, the great Yankee ball player Joe DiMaggio was his mother's cousin. We've often talked about Joe, but I never asked him about Marilyn. Oh yeah, he brightens up. She stayed at my mother's house once. Cousin Joe was passing through and he didn't want to go downtown and deal with the people there. We lived out on Dora Lane. Did you talk to her? What was she like, Ronnie? She sat at the breakfast table in her bathrobe and ate some ham and eggs like a regular person. Now, the first movie star I ever met was my Aunt Martha. She never made it to the big screen. She was on her way. She was a fashion model. I saw magazines with examples of her work. There was a Pepsi-Cola advertisement with her unmistakable face and form featured in an illustration. There was an automobile ad in a glossy magazine with a picture of her in a convertible. She met my uncle on a Matson Line cruise ship sailing from San Francisco to Honolulu. In the 1950s, people on a vacation to Hawaii sailed rather than flew. Passengers did not wear Levi's, gulp sedatives, and eat packaged food in a little tray sitting on their knee. They dressed for dinner and sat at a table with linen and silverware where they socialized. There in the dining room, a well-dressed, confident young man met a beautiful, fashionable young woman over an elegant meal. I'm sure that an ambitious young Alaska fisherman with a good haircut and a nice Hickey Freeman suit cut quite the romantic figure aboard the old Matsonia. I never met Martha's family, but my family, my Italian family, was populated by rough men and tough women. The first time I ever saw Martha, she captured me. More than 50 years have passed. She still has me. I can hear her smooth voice with that Mississippi accent flitting across her words. The only place I'd ever seen a woman like her was in the movies. She was standing in my grandmother's kitchen, waiting to meet the family as we filed in. Martha Stevens was tall and sleek, perfectly made up in the fashion of the time. She had bright red lipstick and wore a slim sundress that hemmed below her knees, with wide shoulder straps displaying a little bit of décolletage. Her costume was accented by a round white brimmed hat, white gloves, and red high heels. Now, I never knew Dior from Chanel. An 11-year-old didn't know what haute couture was, but he knew it when he saw it. When she came to me, she took me in her arms. I still remember the feel of her genuine person and the smell of her perfume. She was always that way to me, warm and real. My Uncle Louis carried her away to his kingdom by the sea. He had an acre of land near a boat harbor where he built a bait and tackle shop with 8 bar stools. Next door, he had a modest freezer plant for fish packing. They moved into a tiny house my uncle had built behind the freezer. She would entertain the family on Sunday in a patio that Louis had built for her. Redwood fence, old ship portholes, a brass bell, and cork lifebuoys for decorations. Martha would dress up, while the family women dressed down. After a while, she conformed. Martha was patently different from the other women in my family. They worked hard and did not believe in what they called nonsense. Their private criticism of her, I thought very harsh. They believed that she could not prosper and survive with any grace in a world that they had been conditioned to think of as unforgiving, a world in which one must apply themselves to the task at hand with a single-minded ferocity, a Catholic world in which one must bear the cross upon which one will hang. There were women in my family who could give birth in a plow furrow, pick up the plow and the baby, and continue down the row. In fact, some of them in the past probably did exactly that. I had the habit of dropping in on her for lunch when I worked for my uncle. She would be drinking wine. She would serve me a glass of Riesling, which I liked. We sat and talked like adults. I basked in her attentions. She was lonely. The sour marriage comprised injury and insult. After a while, Martha slipped away. Afternoons, she would head up the road to the working-class bars on the Strip. At night, after work, Louis, who was not a drinking man, would go up there to find her. The women of the family speculated on her behaviors, making sure they were not overheard by the children. I overhear one of my aunts telling my mother, but she doesn't have any trouble finding a man to buy her a drink. She was, after all, perceived as an ornamental sort of person. Now people in the family are talking about her alcoholism, which is becoming obvious. My Uncle Louis, an old soldier, could settle an issue pretty quickly. I never saw Louis as jealous or overtly abusive, but he was a pretty hard man, not particularly tolerant of anything. One weekend I showed up at the fish plant for work. Martha was gone. The family chittered and caviled about her, but Louis never spoke of it again. I never saw or spoke to her ever again. I used to think that the only movie star I ever knew found the reasonable accommodations that we all seek in life. I pray that she received the grace she deserved. Thinking about her, I see the fault between the world Martha desired and imagined and the world she inhabited, opening into the chasm which would swallow her. A few days later, I asked Ron about Marilyn Monroe DiMaggio again. She was different, all right, he admitted. She looked different, walked different, dressed different. But I was a little boy. I didn't know who she was. Hey, do I have any time left here?
No, 30 seconds.
Yeah, Martinez is a little bit like this town. They're trying to brand themselves with Joe DiMaggio, and they're dragging Marilyn Monroe in the wake. And Marilyn Monroe stories there are a little bit like George Washington slept here. Now, Ronnie, I'm pretty sure that Ronnie was if not a baby, not even born in 1954 when Marilyn Monroe came to town. So this is a memory that was put into his head by somebody in the family. As far as Marilyn Monroe slept here, I don't think Marilyn Monroe ever slept in Martinez. Thank you.